1 minute. Showtime.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kim Tavares, the Executive Director of the Alumni Association, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's presentation. It's part of our winter college virtual week. We have a week long of webinars celebrating our Charter Day, which was yesterday. And this is our series for today. Tomorrow at noon, please join us for Our People Believe in Education, the Unlikely Alliance of the Miami Tribe and Miami University with Professor Cam Shriver. But I want to thank our alumni who are registered this week. We are spanning 6 decades of alumni with our topics. And so today I am so excited to welcome Miami alumnus Wil Haygood, class of 1976, and one of the most respected narrative historians and storytellers today. Wil's work spans journalism, biography, and deeply researched narrative nonfiction. Many people know him as the author of The Butler, A Witness to History, which inspired the major motion picture. He's also written acclaimed books on figures like Thurgood Marshall and Sugar Ray Robinson. And he just has this amazing way of elevating historical stories and significance, with really having this human touch to that, Wil. I think that's your sweet spot. We're going to focus on Wil's newest book, which just came out this last week and had a premiere on campus last night, The War Within a War, which frames the Vietnam War through the lived experience of Black Americans, both abroad and as activists at home. Wil, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention another Miami connection you have. You're an alumnus, you've been here on faculty, you played Miami basketball. Go Redhawks.
Yes, I mean, I am following it night and day. I was so happy to see the stunning record that the team has this year, undefeated. I mean, it's one of the great stories in the nation right now, sports stories, in the great cultural story. I mean, for the true fact that athletes at Miami are truly student athletes. You have to study, have to stay in the zone of both academics and in your skill set on the field. So I was very honored to play on the junior varsity basketball team. But I do have a lineage to this moment in Miami's history. And
yep.
And that's the basketball program.
Yeah. That's right. Oh, that's extremely important, that lineage. But, as we just talked about, your new book that just came out this last week got a really amazing review in the New York Times. Congratulations. And it started from a personal story, from a personal lineage, right? So you had a neighbor named Skip Dunn who went to Vietnam and when you were in the 7th grade. And that's really kind of where this all started. It stayed with you, you said, and this is what made you realize, I got to do something with this. This is more than something that a memory I have. This is something I got to tell people about. Oh, I think we lost Wil for a minute. While we're working on that, if you have questions and you're watching, you can submit those questions live on the Ask a Question, and we will get to those at the end of the webinar today. But we have, you can ask questions about Wil's current book or about any of his past books that he has written that we've done webinars about before as well. You're just tuning in. Oh, there we go. I was going to say we were having some technical difficulties, but we have him back here. Wil, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so this photo here is from Skip Dunn. This was someone that was your neighbor who went to Vietnam when you were in 7th grade. And you said that really this image has stayed with you. And I just wanted you, if you could talk us through a little bit about what finally made you realize that his story was more than just his story, that this was something that would be worthy of a full book.
Yes. Well, I was in the 7th grade, and Skip Dunn and his family lived right across the street from me on North 5th Street in Columbus, Ohio. I would come out of the house every morning, and Skip would wave at me, "Hey, Will," and I would wave at him, "Hey, Skip." And he was going off to high school, and I was going off to the 7th grade. He was just the nicest guy, and waved to me every morning. And then I would see him at the playgrounds during the summer. He taught me how to throw horseshoes. He was a great athlete. And then there was a period of about 2 weeks when I didn't see Skip, and I was very curious, where's Skip at? And so I asked my sister, and we went to high school with Skip, and she said, "Will, Skip's gone to a place called Vietnam." And I really didn't know what Vietnam in the true sense of the word meant. I knew it was a faraway place and that there was a war. And so I lost touch with Skip. And then my mother moved to the east side of town. And in May of 1968, about a month after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And so I was in this housing project, and the National Guardsmen tanks rolled through the housing projects because people had started fires up on Mount Vernon Avenue. So the city was on fire. That happened in various cities around the country from the anger of Martin Luther King's assassination. There were uprisings in Philadelphia, Harlem, and Detroit, and other cities. So I was a little kid, 13 years old, running from tanks. And my mother had to write letters she had to write a letter every time I went to the store to put in my pocket to show a soldier if I was stopped. And my mother's letters were so poignant. She would say, "Dear soldier, please do not shoot my son. He's simply going to the store to get a carton of milk, or some Cheerios." I mean, they were so poignant. My mother was so afraid that there were tanks on the street, and soldiers with guns who were pointing them at kids. And so anyway, life goes on, and I become a writer, and I start to write books. And then I came up with an idea with my editor to write this book about the Vietnam War and the Black soldier experience, because that's a big gap. It really hasn't been covered sufficiently. And one night after the book was finished, I said to myself, whatever happened to Skip Dunn? And I made a call and found out that he had passed away. And then I reached his widow, Miss Neva Dunn, and I'm talking to her. And I asked her to send me a photograph of Skip. And she did. Now, this was after the book was finished. And my editor, Peter Gethers, saw that photograph and said, "Will, you have to go back and revisit your time on North 5th Street in Skip, and you have to write something about that in the book." So it's a very accidental photograph. I was very fortunate to have found it. And then I realized, Kim, that there were 5 other young Blacks on North 5th Street and North 6th Street. And I carried papers to all of their homes. And so I knew I had a way to open the book with those emotional narratives from my memory.
Right. And I think that's what's so, again, that human element, Will, it's the personal stories of all of these people that you profile in here, but your own lived experience as well with this, because you draw parallels about there's the racial dynamics at home, but then they're also happening in Vietnam. And I think, to your point, we didn't hear that side of the story about what made the Black experience of that war fundamentally different from the white soldier experience. talk a little bit about that?
Yes, one can look at the statistics. 59% of the soldiers sent to the front lines in the early years of the war were Black. So listen to that statistic again. 59, almost 60% sent to the front lines were Black, while only 12% of Americans were Black. So you had more Blacks fighting the hardest of the battles in the war. It was President John F. Kennedy who told his aides, he said, we have to be very careful that this is not seen as a white man's war, quote, as a white man's war. Then Martin Luther King Jr., when he turned against the war and said it was sucking money out of food programs, Martin Luther King Jr. said, it's, quote, a white man's war, but a Black man's fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was very deep, that type of statement. And when you look at another statistic, 98% of the draft board members were white. Now, that's not saying that they all were racist, because they certainly were not. But if you were a young Black guy, 18, 19 years old, your odds of getting a deferment for whatever reason were very slim. And since more whites were going to college at that time than Blacks, more whites, young whites, were able to get college deferments. And so you had an ethnic group, Blacks, being sent around the world, Asia, to fight another ethnic group of people. So it had to be a kind of a split screen psychic thing going on for the Black soldier. The civil rights bills weren't passed until 1964, 1965, and then 1968. But even during that time period, there were many civil rights murders in the country, not starting with what happened in 1964 with the Freedom Summer workers, where we know Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney left Oxford, Ohio, and went to Mississippi and were murdered less than 30 hours after arriving in Mississippi. And so Black soldiers had to realize that there was a war going on within a war. They were far away from home, and yet their mothers couldn't find an easy path to vote.
Right. Right. And as you said, they're dealing with what they know is going on back here, and then what, A, the horrors of war, and B, being treated differently, having a very different experience. And, I think you pointed out that this was the first time of an integrated force to fight. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so, go ahead.
Yes. Which was really, in its own way, wonderful. I mean,
Right.
even though it was war, it was kind of a forced brotherhood. Blacks and whites had never interacted as closely in life in this country as they had during the Vietnam War. There's a line in the book where I say, white couldn't survive without Black, and Black couldn't survive without white in that war. It was a forced brotherhood, where the problems happened not out in the field where they were fighting, because everybody had each other's back. I mean, everybody wanted to come home. So it was in your best interest to help your fellow soldier fight in the bush, because everybody wanted to get back safely. Where the problems started were back mostly at the base camps. And so you're a soldier and you're Black and you go into your tent to go to sleep. You wake up in the morning, and there are several instances of this in the book. You wake up in the morning, walk outside your tent, and you notice that somebody has planted a Confederate flag outside of your tent. And that had to hurt and pain every Black soldier who would see that, because, hours earlier, they were out in the bush fighting with their fellow white soldiers.
Absolutely. And to your point there, they're out there fighting, they're side by side, but you talked about how certain cultural norms were tried to be pushed down. And I really, you talk a lot about people, and we'll talk about some of those, but one of your chapters it's about a place that was referred to as Soul Alley. It was really a place where the Black soldiers could kind of escape, right? And be a place for them. And I was really floored reading this part. And you and I talked a little bit about this, but that something that is referred to as the DAP, which is a way to greet each other, a handshake, was seen as very controversial back then in Vietnam, if the soldiers did that. And, as I said to you, my white suburban teens dap me up. I hear this on a regular basis now.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, and about that, how that was seen as something so controversial back then, and how they dealt with those things.
Well, most of the soldiers who were Black and were coming out of a harshly segregated nation.
Right.
In segregation, of course, you form your own sports heroes, and you have your own music, and you have your own customs, and you have your own dietary wants. And just because you are millions of miles away doesn't mean that all of that ceases. And so the U.S. Army didn't even have things as simple as hair grease for the Black soldier. They didn't have food that they were used to growing up down south. And so these soldiers went to a section of Saigon and asked the store owners and the business owners, hey, can you have some of the food that we like? Or, hey, we have Afro hairstyles, big Afro hairstyles. So we need a special kind of comb. It's called the Afro pick. It's called an Afro pick.
Mm-hmm.
You could grow your hair out long, and then you could comb it with that pick. And so there were all these sort of customs that the Black soldier missed from being back home. And they convinced store owners in Saigon to start ordering the kind of food that they like, and to start playing the kind of music on the radios that they like. One of the famous tunes that came out sort of toward the war's end was a tune by Marvin Gaye called "What's Going On." And Skip Dunn's eyes, the guy on the cover of the book, his eyes seemed to ask the whole world, what's going on? Why am I over here? And the Marvin Gaye song went something like this. Oh, brother, brother, war is not the answer. Only love can conquer hate. Oh, we got to find a way to bring some love in here today. Oh, brother, brother. Now, I am the Marvin Gaye, I admit, but that song became a seminal song of the war because it questioned the war. I asked one of my students here recently, how long do you think the Vietnam War lasted? And she said, 3 to 4 years. It lasted 12 plus years. And, part of the myth that has been built up around the war is that we won. That's the myth.
Right.
No, we did not win. At best, it was a truce. We had to leave after 12 years. We were spending so much money in the war. So many people were dying. And it was just a tragic war. But that said, too, and there are very many, I don't know if this is the right word, but there are very, very many beautiful stories in the book of Blacks helping whites and whites helping Blacks,
Really?
in the kind of opportunities to help each other that they did not experience in the States. Now that on the screen, that's a picture of Soul Alley.
Yes. And and as you said there, that the locals in Saigon, were able to kind of bring those comforts from home that the American military wasn't necessarily providing for Black soldiers, and to give them that experience. Yeah,
Right. If I can say this
sure.
real quick, while the war was going on, the Black soldiers would get letters from their brothers and their sisters back home and their parents telling them about all of the mayhem going on as families were trying to vote, families were trying to get housing, families were trying to find jobs. And so they would read these letters, and they would be informed of how harsh the living conditions remained, even with civil rights bills, for their family members. And so that also was another layer of the pain that explained the war within a war.
Right. And thinking about that, we often hear about, with it being such an unpopular war that we did not win, that when the soldiers came back, they did not receive the hero's welcome for the most part. What was that like in the Black community for those soldiers that came back? How were they received easily back into their communities, or did they also have a rough time transitioning back in?
Yes. Well, one of the fascinating things with Blacks in the military is that joining the military has always been a way to prove your love of country. Even during the Civil War, it was Frederick Douglass who went to Abraham Lincoln and said, look, the Union is having a hard time winning this war. Let the Black man fight. Give the Black man the musket. Let him have the bars on his shoulders. He will help save the Union. He will not let America fall. And Lincoln finally agreed to let Blacks join the Union. 200,000 Blacks joined the Union, and they were told by the Confederate officers that if you are caught in the South, we will not send you to any sort of prison camp. We will hang you. We will lynch you because you're Black. Now, white soldiers would not be lynched if they were caught, white Union soldiers. But the Black soldiers, the South told them, we will kill you in the woods. We will lynch you. We will hang you by the neck in the woods. And yet those soldiers kept joining. I mean, it was a love of country. We love our country. We love our country. And that was what they were trying to show the USA. Yes, even though we have been brutalized and lynched, we want to fight to save the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And the ideal um, of freedom. And so, moving ahead, when they came back from Vietnam, there were myriad problems in finding jobs and finding decent housing, and simply in being treated fairly.
Right. Right. Well, as you said, there are a lot of stories in here in terms of individuals. You feature an Air Force pilot named Fred Cherry, Dr. Elbert Nelson, Wallace Terry, and an amazing woman, Philippa Schuyler, and talk about how, these personal stories and lives kind of intersected with the war and the civil rights struggle. And we've talked about that. But, I think, how do you decide what stories to include when you're going through the research like this, Will? Because there are clearly so many facets to this, so many different stories to tell. How do you choose?
There are stories, stories to choose from. And I think, one of the biggest themes of this book happened early on when I was talking to my editor, Peter Gethers, about this book. We had sat down and we both agreed that and we both knew that there hadn't been a wide-angle nonfiction look at the Black experience in Vietnam. Now, there was an oral history called Bloods that came out, more than 50 years ago. And so it definitely was time to tell a multi-layered nonfiction account of the Black experience in the war. So me and my editor are sitting down at a restaurant in New York City, and we're talking about this book 5 years ago. And at the end of the chat, he looked at me and he said, "All right, Will, one more thing to add. There must be women in this book." And I hadn't thought about that, for the simple fact that women were not allowed to fight, and you don't really think of them in the Vietnam War, sort of at the same time. But there were some amazing women who had a lot to do with the Vietnam War. And I tell the story of these 9 major figures. 3 of them are women. And I'll tell you about one woman whose picture you had shown on the screen, and you mentioned her, Philippa Schuyler. There she is again. Philippa Schuyler was a young pianist. She was known all over the country. When she was 12 years old, she was a concert pianist. She was biracial, mother white, father Black. The parents, as Philippa got older, the parents wanted her to hide the fact that she was half Black. And she did. But she saw a story once in the newspaper where young Vietnamese children fathered by Black soldiers were being ostracized because they were half Vietnamese and half Black. They were being beaten on the streets. They were being kicked and spat upon. And Philippa, being biracial herself, this angle of war really touched her. So she decided in the mid 60s that she was going to go to Vietnam to rescue these children. And she did. She made one successful trip. And she was very proud of herself. She met Black soldiers for the first time in her life. And they began to educate her on her Black history, which she had been running from all her life. It's a very poignant story. But then on a succeeding trip, I hope I'm not spoiling this for people. Philippa, she boarded a helicopter and was ferrying the children out of Saigon to safety. And the helicopter went down and killed her and killed several of the orphans. That's just one story of female heroism that is sprinkled throughout the book, I'm very proud to say.
Great. Well, and speaking of proud, you said that out of your 10 books, you feel like this is the most important one that you've done. Why is that?
Well,
You feel that way?
yes, I think it's important because there has been, as we know, in recent years, attacks from on high, from Black military. I mean, about Black military history, certain figures in the country are trying to minimize what Blacks have done throughout history. Books have been banned about these heroes, and a nation cannot continue to grow when we stifle learning. We must honor our history, the good and bad. We must respect facts. We must know that it's righteous to read good books. I mean, my whole career has been built around investing, research, telling stories that have been hidden stories that uh, stories that I didn't learn,
Right.
and stories that I get hungrier and hungrier uh, for. So I think at this time
Right.
in history, uh, that a book like this is needed more than ever, uh, because the nation is in such turmoil, uh, racial turmoil. Uh, we are coming up on the 250th anniversary of this nation. We should be further along as far as racial healing than we are right now. We just 2 days ago lost the civil rights icon, Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was with Martin Luther King and who was at Selma during the Selma March, and who was a titanic figure. It saddens me that some of our civil rights heroes have left us, and the country hasn't been as far along as I'm sure that they would have hoped. We here at Miami gave John Lewis, and the great Georgia congressman who was involved in so many civil rights moments, the Selma March and others, we gave him the Freedom Summer of 1964 award, and I was at that ceremony in Washington, D.C. One of the highlights of my life. I was there with President Crawford and other officials from Miami, and I humbly say I'm quite honored to have received the Freedom of Summer '64 award as well. So these stories are important. There's no more important work that I can do in my life. I've written all kinds of stories. I've covered stories all over the world. but telling stories that need to be told are just very important stories to tell.
Yes, and and as you mentioned, it took you about 5 years from the time you initially talked about this book to where to get it here, to get it printed and to published, and a lot has gone on. So I'm sure, that it not only influenced you in terms of, your resolve that this was the right stories to tell, but did, in terms of which ones you wanted to focus on, were there things that, as I, how do you organize and weave so many things together without losing the intimacy you want to have, and then thinking about also kind of the context that you're writing in right now too. It's a lot to combine together and you do it so well.
Fortunately, Kim, I think it's my training as a journalist with the Boston Globe and the Washington Post. I think it's that type of training that has helped me be very confident when I set out on my long journeys to write these books. It takes 4 to 5 years per book. It takes a lot of discipline. I think that has helped me. I remember, once I was at the Boston Globe and a features editor told me that she wanted me to go up to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst to interview a visiting writer, which is what I am here at Miami, visiting writer. Anyway, she said there was an author there who had a brand new book that was just published, and she wanted me to go up there and interview the author and write a story about him and his new book. And I asked her who it was, and she said, James Baldwin. The James Baldwin, one of the titanic figures in arts and letters in this country, and who wrote a lot about race. And he was a hero of mine. I first was turned on to the writing of James Baldwin here at Miami from one of my professors, Miriam Musgrave. So anyway, I was so excited to be going up there to interview Mr. Baldwin. And I went up there and I sat in the house with him, and the interview went so great that I told myself that I was going to make some time at the end of the interview to ask him something very personal. And I did. I said, excuse me, Mr. Baldwin, may I ask you something personal? And he said, oh, sure, baby, shoot. What is it? And I said, now at this point, I hadn't written one book in my life. I said, well, Mr. Baldwin, do you think that someday I will be able to write books? And he was smoking a cigarette. He took a long drag on the cigarette, and he said, baby, how would I know that? What kind of question is that to ask me? Books are hard to write. Let me tell you that. Books are very hard. It takes a lot of discipline to write books. How in the world do I know if you have the discipline to write books? That's a crazy question. Why would you even ask me that? And oh my God, I felt so horrified that I had asked this titanic figure such a silly question. And he saw the hurt on my face. And so he scooted closer to me and he said, hey, baby, but I'll tell you what, whatever you do in life, you must go the way your blood beats.
I like that.
I tell that story to my students here to this day. Whatever you do in life, you must go the way your blood beats. I followed that advice. I wanted to write books. So there I was sitting with Mr. James Baldwin with 0 books to my name. And now here I am today with 10 books to my name.
That's great advice. And I think about that, Will, you've written 10 books over, a stretch of time where how has it changed from that first time when you were the reporter and talking to James Baldwin to today in terms of your research methods in the digital age? And, What are you still using a typewriter? Are you taking notes by hand? Or do you have easier access, or is it harder to get some of that research material that you go for this?
Yeah.
So some are tried and true, and then there might be some new things that have helped make it easier.
Yeah. I still depend on shoe leather, old-fashioned shoe leather. I still like to get on planes or drive in cars to meet people, to knock on their doors, folks who I'm going to be writing about. I still love that process. It's still wonderful to me. Just like with this book, with the Vietnam book, it was so thrilling, wonderful to travel around the country for 4.5, 5 years and meet veterans, Black veterans, white veterans, men, women, their families. It was just a rich experience. And these veterans were so eager to tell their story. I mean, it's always been a hard war to write about. It's always been a hard war to understand. Why were we there so long? Why did so many people come back with such pain? There were so many suicides after the Vietnam War. There was untold bravery. And so it's still the same process for me, finding people who have stories to tell, because basically that's what I am. I'm a storyteller. I tell stories about how this country was founded, how it was born, how it survived, how we interact with the rest of the world. Why does race continue to haunt us? I tell stories. I mean, I'm so proud to have been a student at Miami, to have taken so many courses. When I was here, I was on the quarter system, so 3 quarters a year. And so you could take a variety of courses. I mean, I took courses all over the map: English, short story writing, history. It was just the type of education that I needed, liberal arts, to open my mind, to let my mind bloom and wonder. And I think that has greatly helped me write the kind of books that I've written. I mean, I've had to be versatile, thinking wise, to tell the kind of stories I've told. I mean, I've told a story about Sammy Davis Jr., the entertainer, Thurgood Marshall, the U.S. Supreme Court lawyer, about a White House butler who nobody had written about an all-Black high school that won 2 state championships in 1 year, about the history of cinema in film. I wrote a book, sort of a family memoir about growing up here in the Midwest. And now this book about war. Some of this book, I think, was ignited to Kim by the fact that as a foreign correspondent, I covered wars. I covered the Somalia war and also war conflicts all over Africa. I was in South Africa when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. Those were very tough times to be in that country. Still very dangerous, of course, because so many whites did not want to give up their power. And so now the racial climate in South Africa seems much better than our racial climate. look at that. I mean, so anyway, I hope that was a long answer.
No, no, it's wonderful. We do have just a couple of questions that came in, so I want to make sure that we get to those. The first question I have is from a gentleman named Bruce. It says, "Can you talk about how the North Vietnamese used propaganda to target Black American soldiers?"
That is a great question, Bruce. Thank you for asking it, because and it gives me a chance to say this. There was a doctor who I interviewed, Dr. Elbert Nelson, out of Cincinnati. He was here with us on campus last night. He told me a story that is unforgettable. He said, he was in Vietnam. He was a combat doctor, of course, and he was in the bush one day, and he saw a little note, small, about this size. It was a note, and it was taped to a tree, and it was left there by the North Vietnamese, and it said, and I'm sort of paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, but it said, "Dear colored soldiers, we in North Vietnam are not your enemies. Your enemies are in the State Department, who are the warmongers back in America. Please do not keep fighting us," something like that. So to the Black soldier to come across flyers like that had been dropped into the jungles, to come across those kind of flyers must have been stunning. I mean, you had an ethnic people who were Black, who were fighting other ethnic people in ordered and commanded to fight those other ethnic people by white military officers. So you can see how that would make the soldier lying in his bunk at night think about, why am I over here fighting for a nation that hasn't given me true freedom yet? So, that theme also circulates throughout the book. There were many white soldiers who wondered why Blacks couldn't move up as fast in the ranks as they were, and they would complain on behalf of their fellow soldiers who were Black. When it's uneven, when it's so uneven, people can see it. They could see it. And there were many white officers who didn't like it, who wanted the system to be fairer.
Well, and that disparity leads into another good question we just had submitted from Jill. Jill said, "My understanding is that VA loans were not available to Black veterans after World War II. Had that policy changed either after Korea or Vietnam, or if not, when did it? Because those really gave that's what made that middle class and American dream possible in the 40s and 50s. So what happened, and was that something that was available to them, or were there any other disparities in benefit availability when they came back?"
Yes, it did change slowly. It's always been hard for Blacks to integrate neighborhoods here in this country. And that still goes on. So I can't say that it has vanished. But when you fought for your country and you come back, and you can't live, even if you have the money and you can't live in certain neighborhoods because of stereotype, then that is extremely painful. I mean, look, all throughout the South, this country only has one Black U.S. senator from the South. And if you just looked at the populations of Black folk, there should be way more than one Black U.S. senator in the American South. I mean, it's just obvious. And it's gerrymandering that goes on, and it's redlining that goes on, and it's people who are stymied from voting that goes on. These things are very, very painful for veterans because they've laid their life on the line. I mean, look what happened in World War II. In World War I. In World War I, the U.S. government did not want Blacks fighting in the war to save the country. So there were thousands of Blacks who got on a boat and went to France and told the French, I will join your army since you're fighting on the side of Americans. I love my country so much, but my country doesn't want me to have a weapon in my hand. But I want to fight. And so you had thousands of Black soldiers who paid their own money to hop on a boat to go to France to fight for a country that didn't love them. That blows my mind. I mean, that blows my mind. It really does. To this day, I've seen a lot in my years on Earth, and I've circled the globe twice as a writer, but that fact that World War I, and there were a lot of medals that the French gave these Black soldiers, but nobody should question their patriotism. Ever, ever, ever. And it's been done in this country in recent years, recent months. It's been done. But I think that I think that the Black soldier has given a little more of his or her patriotism to keep proving time and time again how much they love this nation.
Thanks, Will. Our last question here, we just have a few minutes, is from Garth. And he says, I think it's a fitting one to end with here. Wars can change countries for better and for worse. How did the Vietnam War change Black America? And I'll add to that, Will, if I'm to walk away from this book with one thing, what is it you want us to think about?
Well, I think that the Vietnam War added an even deeper meaning to the civil rights movement. I think sometimes we think of the civil rights movement only from the vantage point of the successful bills that grew out of the civil rights movement, the 1957 Civil Rights Bill under Eisenhower, and then the 1964, 65, and 68 bills under Lyndon Johnson. I don't think we think about how difficult it was for Blacks to get into medical school, to get into law school, to arrive on campuses, to be treated fairly. Just the day-to-day indignity that Blacks have had to endure in this country. I think of Skip Dunn, who wanted to go to college after high school, but his family didn't have the money. So he was not going to get he was not going to get a college deferment. He was a Marine. He joined the Marines, toughest of the tough, and he served proudly. I think what I would like people and students to take away from this book is the fact that Skip Dunn might not look like you, but he is the best of all of us. He is the best of all of us. He wanted everybody to be stitched into the American flag. That's a noble cause. That is a noble cause, that we remain the United States of America. That is a noble cause. It should be number one on our agenda as a collective people. All colors, we are all colors of the rainbow. And wars are fought. Ultimately, we like to think to keep peace. No one likes wars. I've been shot at and I've been taken hostage, and I can tell you, wars are frightening, deadly, dangerous, bloody, horrific. But when we have to keep freedom comes at a price. One of the founding fathers said, "It is a republic if you can keep it." Mm-hmm. And the Skip Dunns of the world, and the Philippa Schuyler's of the world, and the Joe Andersons of the world, and all the people who fight to defend our freedom should be honored. And my way to honor them is to write, and to keep writing, and to keep telling stories. And that's what I intend to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wil. I'm really looking forward to finishing the book and to read these stories that you've written here. As I said, you do such a great job with bringing the human element, the American element, to everybody and every story that you tell. So thank you so much for being with us today. Thank all of you for joining us today. Again, please join us this week for our other Winter College programs. And thanks for being here. Love and honor.
Love and honor.